All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're popping the hood to look at the hidden legal mechanics that high net worth families actually use to preserve their wealth across generations. Specifically, we are unpacking a really fascinating foundational piece of American trust law, known as the Spendthrift provision. Now, I know that might sound a little dense at first, but honestly, once you understand how this machinery works, it is going to completely change the way you think about money, ownership, and asset protection.
So, picture this. $1 million lawsuit drops out of nowhere. Can a family's wealth actually survive that kind of hit? It's basically the ultimate stress test for any fortune. I want you to imagine building a legacy that can literally withstand bankruptcies, completely failed business ventures, or even messy divorces. And we're not talking about illegally hiding assets in some shady offshore account, right? We're talking about utilizing a totally counterintuitive legal reality, where a beneficiary's absolute financial disasters simply do not wipe out the core family capital.
Here is our roadmap for getting there. First, the Firewall of Wealth. Second, ownership versus beneficial interest. Third, the independent trustee. Fourth, important legal limitations. And finally, building generational resilience.
Section 1. The Firewall of Wealth, defining the ultimate legal shield.
So, what exactly is a spendthrift provision? Basically, it's a legal mechanism that blocks a beneficiary from selling off their future interest in a trust, and crucially, it stops creditors from garnishing that money prematurely. It completely restricts voluntary transfers, meaning, no, you absolutely cannot pledge your trust fund as collateral to go buy a flashy sports car. But it also restricts involuntary transfers, so a creditor's lawsuit simply cannot reach into the trust to satisfy a debt. Under the Uniform Trust Code, this provision legally stops the gavel from dropping right at the trust's boundary, way before a distribution is ever even made. That boundary itself is the heart of the whole protection.
Section 2. Ownership versus beneficial interest. Why not owning your money is a superpower.
This is where things get really counterintuitive. Most people assume that if you are the beneficiary of a trust, you own the assets inside it. Well, legally speaking, that is usually incorrect. A properly structured trust legally severs ownership. The trustee is the one who actually owns the legal title. They literally hold the keys and make the decisions. The beneficiary? They just have a beneficial interest, or equitable ownership, standing safely behind the wall. Because creditors can only step into the shoes of the debtor, and the debtor doesn't legally hold the keys to the vault, those creditors can't seize the chest. It's an absolute masterclass in legal separation.
Now, this dynamic perfectly explains why revocable trusts completely fail against creditors while irrevocable trusts succeed. Sure, revocable trusts are fantastic for avoiding probate, but if the settlor keeps the power to revoke it at any time, well, creditors can generally access those assets during the settlor's lifetime. Irrevocable trusts, on the other hand, are an entirely different animal. The settlor permanently surrenders ownership. This hard, legal separation is exactly why irrevocable trusts are the absolute gold standard for wealth preservation. When you willingly step away from absolute control, those assets become essentially walled off from your personal liabilities.
Section 3. The independent trustee, the crucial gatekeeper of the trust corpus.
Let's actually run through a hypothetical disaster to see how this plays out in the real world. Say child A takes a massive swing and starts a high-risk construction company. But unfortunately, the business totally tanks, and millions of dollars in lawsuits follow. Normally, child A's personal assets and real estate would be completely liquidated to pay off those creditors. But because the family used a properly drafted spendthrift trust, the firewall holds firm. The assets owned by the trust remain completely insulated, sitting safely outside child A's personal estate. The firewall simply does what it was engineered to do, withstand the absolute blast radius of a failed venture.
How does the trustee actually enforce this shield? It all comes down to the precise phrasing. If a trust says, pay child A $100,000 every single January, a creditor could easily anticipate that and just intercept the cash. Instead, a strong trust uses discretionary phrasing, like, trustee may distribute income or principal in the trustee's sole discretion. Because the beneficiary cannot legally force a mandatory payment, their creditors can't force one either. The trustee becomes this ultimate, uncrackable gatekeeper.
However, that gatekeeper has an incredibly strict job description. The independent trustee isn't just the beneficiary's best friend or alter ego. They can't just be a rubber stamp handing out cash whenever the beneficiary asks. They have to apply real objective judgment. They have to follow the exact terms of the trust, balance the competing needs of different beneficiaries, and fiercely protect the property. This strict adherence to fiduciary duty is exactly what preserves the spendthrift protections over the span of decades. If a trustee is too easily controlled, a judge will simply pierce the trust. So the strength of the whole system is directly tied to the strict independence of the person running it.
Section 4. Important legal limitations. When the firewall gets bypassed.
Time for a quick reality check. As amazing as this setup is, a spendthrift provision is not absolute immunity. It is definitely not a get-out-of-jail-free card. There are hard-coded statutory and public policy bypasses that will smash right through that shield. In a lot of states, if a beneficiary owes child support or spousal support like alimony, the firewall completely fails. The exact same goes for certain government claims, like federal taxes or creditors who actually provided services to protect the beneficiary's interest in the trust in the first place. Basically, public policy dictates that these specific obligations will always take precedence over protecting family wealth.
Yet there is another massive catch to keep in mind here. Under the Universal Trust Code, the exact millisecond the money leaves the protective bubble of the trust and hits the beneficiary's personal checking account, the shield drops. Poof, gone. It is no longer protected trust property, it's just the beneficiary's personal cash. At that exact second, the robotic claws of creditors can strike, and all ordinary legal remedies become fully available to seize those distributed assets. The absolute safety literally only exists while the money is inside the vault.
Also, we absolutely have to talk about timing. You can't just wave a magic wand and conjure up a trust when things go wrong. The law is super clear. Courts may completely disregard transfers intended to hinder, delay, or defraud creditors. Fraudulent transfer laws ensure you cannot legally cure a massive financial problem by suddenly moving all your assets into an irrevocable trust after a liability or lawsuit has already occurred. This kind of heavy-duty legal architecture has to be built proactively. You have to fix the roof when the skies are clear and sunny, not when the storm clouds of a lawsuit are already pouring rain.
Section 5. Building generational resilience. Engineering long-term family capital.
Let's zoom out for a second and look at the true power of this legal firewall over decades. In year 0, we have the grandparents' original savings seeding the trust. Fast forward to year 30, and that capital has successfully seeded family companies for generation 2. By year 60, maybe it's grown into commercial property for generation 3. Because of the Spendthrift firewall, one generation's failed startup or messy divorce doesn't wipe out the grandparents' original hard work. Instead of every generation owning the assets outright and risking the whole pie, each generation just becomes a beneficiary of protected, continuously compounding capital. The wealth literally outlives the mistakes.
By executing this blueprint, families shift their entire mindset from merely protecting a single person to actively engineering a fortified castle around the capital itself. But it requires precise alignment. You need an irrevocable trust to permanently separate ownership, a rock-solid spendthrift provision, an independent trustee who actually exercises real fiduciary discretion, an avoidance of mandatory payouts, and a commitment to constantly reviewing the trust as state laws and family dynamics inevitably evolve over the decades.
Which brings us to the ultimate question you have to ask yourself when you're looking at these kinds of advanced structures. Are you just trying to protect a person, or are you actually trying to protect the family capital itself? It is a profound shift in perspective, but honestly, it's exactly what separates fleeting wealth from enduring, multi-generational legacies.